I want you to close your eyes for a second and picture a version of yourself that is completely at peace. You are standing right on the edge of a dream you have spent 40 long years building, brick by brick. Maybe you can smell the salt air of that coastal town where you always said you'd buy a little place. Or perhaps it is just the quiet, comforting scent of old books in a home library you finally have the time to enjoy. Think about the decades you spent punching the clock, the endless office politics you navigated, those grueling commutes in the dark, and all the weekends you sacrificed just to get to this specific moment. This is supposed to be your finish line. The house is finally paid off, your career is winding down, and for the first time in your life, your calendar is starting to look empty in the most beautiful way possible. You have earned this. You've paid your dues to society, to your boss, and to your family. You've carried the weight for everyone else, and now it's your turn. But then, just as you reach out to grab the handle of that door leading into your golden years, you feel a resistance. You realize the door is locked. And it's not just locked, it is barred from the other side by heavy, invisible chains that were being forged while you were too busy working to notice. What if I told you that despite all your hard work, despite every dollar you carefully tucked away, and despite your very best intentions, your retirement could be hijacked? It's a chilling thought, isn't it? The idea that the peace you were promised, the quiet life you envisioned, is being eroded by forces that aren't even your own doing. It feels deeply unfair. You could do everything right, follow every rule in the book, save every penny, stay out of trouble, and still find yourself struggling in the twilight of your life. We aren't talking about a sudden stock market crash or a bad investment that went south. No, we are talking about something much more personal and much harder to see. 3 specific generational burdens that are as quiet as they are devastating. These aren't the things you'll hear about at a retirement seminar. You won't find warnings about these in the glossy brochures sent out by financial planners. Yet, right now, these very burdens are quietly dismantling the futures of millions of hardworking people. In this video, we are going to pull back the curtain and look these 3 invisible thieves right in the eye. We're going to explore why your bank account might be leaking, why your heart feels so heavy when it should feel light, and why your body might be starting to fail you just as you're finally supposed to start living for yourself. This isn't about being cynical or negative. It's about being awake to the reality of the world we live in. It's about realizing that if you don't identify these generational burdens right now, they will consume the very freedom you spent a lifetime building. We're going to look at how these burdens have a way of disguising themselves. They look like love, they look like duty, and they look like necessity. That's what makes them so dangerous. They're almost impossible to spot until you're already buried under their weight. This is your wake-up call. If you've ever felt like you're running a race where the finish line just keeps moving further away, this message is for you. We need to close the gap between the retirement you planned and the reality that is threatening to take its place. By the time we're done today, you won't just know what these burdens are, you'll see exactly how they've been siphoning off your joy. Your freedom is far too valuable to lose to a ghost from the past or a mistake from the next generation. Let's figure out if your golden years are at risk, and, more importantly, let's figure out how to take the key back. Think about the retiree who should be out traveling or finally picking up that hobby they've put off for 30 years. Instead, they're sitting at their kitchen table in the quiet of the morning, staring at a stack of bills that don't even belong to them. Maybe they're still paying off an adult child's credit card debt, Or perhaps they've taken out a second mortgage to help a grandson get through college because they just couldn't bear to see him struggle the way they did. This is a person who helps because they have a massive heart. They help because they love their family more than anything, but that love is being leveraged against their own survival. There is a deep, quiet ache in realizing that your children aren't as self-sufficient as you were at their age. And the guilt that comes with even the thought of saying no is absolutely paralyzing. You want to be the hero. You want to be the provider. You want to be the one who makes everything okay. But you have to ask yourself, who is making it okay for you? Then there's the other side of that squeeze. The person who spends every single weekend driving across town to look after an aging parent. You're watching someone who used to be your hero, someone who was once so strong, become frail and forgetful. You're the one managing the medications, you're the one handling the chores, and you're the one absorbing all their frustrations and fears. And as you're doing all of this, you start to feel your own health slipping. Your back starts to ache a little more, your sleep is fragmented because you're worrying about the next phone call, and your own doctor's appointments keep getting pushed to the back burner because mum or dad had another emergency. It's a labour of love, of course it is, but it's also a labour that is taxing your own golden years before they've even truly started. You feel the heavy weight of their decline, and in the quiet moments when no one is watching, you can't help but wonder if this is exactly what your future looks like too. The empathy you feel for them is tied into a growing, silent fear for yourself. And let's not forget the professional, the high achiever who has finally made it after years of grinding. But instead of a celebration, you're met with this heavy, unspoken guilt for succeeding while the rest of the family is still struggling. You feel like you owe it to everyone to share the wealth, to fix every problem, and to be the one who carries the entire legacy on your shoulders. When a sibling loses a job or a cousin needs a loan, you're the first person they call. You feel this intense sense of duty, a generational obligation to be the saviour of the family. But suddenly, this success you worked so hard for starts to feel like a burden rather than a blessing. You find yourself working harder than ever, not to build your own dreams, but just to keep the entire extended family afloat. I see you, I really do. I see the exhaustion behind that smile you put on during the holidays. I see the way you check your bank balance with a heavy sigh, knowing that a huge chunk of what you've saved is being siphoned off by the needs and the mistakes of others. It is a heavy thing to be the pillar of a family. It is a lonely thing to be the one who always has to be strong so everyone else can fall apart. We've been taught since we were kids that helping family is the ultimate virtue, and in so many ways it is. But there comes a point where helping turns into enabling, and where sacrifice turns into self-destruction. This struggle is real, it is valid, and it is way more common than people like to admit. You are not mean for wanting your own life back. You are not selfish for wanting to protect the retirement you spent 40 years of your life earning. We have to acknowledge this pressure, because if we don't, the guilt will keep you trapped in a cycle of service that will eventually leave you with nothing left to give, not to your family, and certainly not to yourself. Let's get into the first and maybe the most obvious burden, the financial anchor. This is what I call the perpetual support system. In places like the US and Canada, we're seeing a massive shift in how money moves between generations, but it's not the kind of inheritance we used to talk about. Instead of wealth being passed down after a long, full life, it's being drained out in real time. This is the transfer of debt and the subsidization of lifestyle. We are living in a time where so many parents are essentially acting as an interest-free bank for their adult children, well into their 30s, 40s, and even their 50s. Let's look at the math for a second, because the math doesn't have feelings and it doesn't care about your guilt. When you provide just a little bit of help to an adult child, maybe $500 a month for their insurance, or a few thousand here and there for car repairs or a rent gap, you aren't just losing that cash. You are losing the compound interest that money could be earning for your own future medical care. If you're 55 or 60 years old, every single dollar you give away is a dollar that won't be there when you're 85 and might need assisted living. By subsidizing the lifestyle of someone who has decades of earning potential ahead of them, you are depleting a fund that can never, ever be replenished. You are effectively trading your safety in old age for their comfort in the present. It's a lopsided trade, yet millions of parents are making it every single day. Why does this happen? It's the psychology of financial codependency. We live in a culture that has made it much harder for young people to reach the same milestones their parents did, things like home ownership or stable lifelong careers. As a parent, it absolutely breaks your heart to see your child struggle, so you step in. You pay the cell phone bill, you let them move back home rent-free for just a few months that turn into years. You cover the emergencies that seem to happen every other month. But here is the hard, cold truth. When you remove the consequences of their financial choices, you are also removing their opportunity to grow. You're taking away their chance to pivot, to learn resilience, and to find their own way. You are creating a financial anchor that is hooked directly into your retirement fund, and it's dragging you both down. This also extends to what I call ancestral debts, or the family legacy of poverty. In many families, there's an unspoken rule. If you're the one who made it, you have to pull everyone else up with you. You find yourself paying for your parents' neglected house repairs or clearing out a sibling's debt, because that's just what family does. But where does it actually end? If you're the only one saving and everyone else is spending, you aren't a savior, you're a target. You are becoming the insurance policy for people who simply refuse to buy their own. Think about the oxygen mask principle they teach you on every flight. The flight attendant always says, "Put on your own mask before assisting others." Why? Because if you run out of oxygen, you are completely useless to everyone else. The exact same thing applies to your finances. If you bankrupt your retirement to help your family right now, you will eventually become a massive financial burden to them later on. By trying to save them today, you are almost guaranteeing that they will have to support you in 20 years because you'll have nothing left. That isn't love, that's just a cycle of poverty that hasn't hit its peak yet. The financial anchor is so heavy because it is tied to our deepest, most vulnerable emotions, our instinct to provide, and our terror of seeing those we love in pain. But we have to realize that providing perpetual support is not the same thing as providing a foundation. A foundation is something someone can actually build on. Perpetual support is a crutch that eventually breaks the person leaning on it. And it definitely breaks the person acting as the crutch. We have to look at the long-term path here. If you keep going at this rate, what is your bank account going to look like in 15 years? What will your actual quality of life be? If the answer involves you working until you're 80 because you gave your golden years away in increments of $200 and $500, then that financial anchor is already dragging you under the waves. Now, before we get any deeper into the psychological side of things, I want to give you some room to breathe. We need to talk about micro shifts. You didn't find yourself in this situation overnight, and you aren't going to get out of it by blowing up your entire life in a single afternoon. But you can start to shift the momentum. You can start to reclaim your future through small, intentional, and very practical applications of boundaries. These aren't radical, world-ending changes. They are just shifts in your perspective and your habits that protect your golden years while still allowing you to be a loving, present family member. The first micro-shift is setting what I call a hard cap. Most people help their family on an as-needed basis, which is incredibly dangerous because need is subjective and it is infinite. A hard cap means you decide right now, with a cool head, exactly how much financial assistance you are willing and able to give per year without putting your own future at risk. This is a number based on your actual budget, not on your emotions in a moment of crisis. Once that cap is reached, the bank is closed. No exceptions. This allows you to say yes when it truly matters, but it also gives you a built-in no for when a request exceeds your capacity. You aren't saying, "I don't love you," you're saying, "This is what I have available to help." The second micro-shift is invisible savings. If you're the kind of person who feels like money burns a hole in your pocket because you feel guilty having it while others don't, then make that money invisible. Automate your retirement contributions and your future care fund so that the money never even touches your checking account. If you don't see it as available cash, you'll be much less likely to offer it up for someone else's latest emergency. You have to start treating your retirement savings like a non-negotiable bill that must be paid to your future self. Your future self is a real person that you are responsible for, just as much as you're responsible for your kids or your parents. The third, and honestly the most difficult shift, is the big talk. This is the conversation where you lay out the new reality for your family. You have to be completely honest. You sit down with your adult children or your siblings and you say, "I love you more than words can say, and I want the best for you. But I've been looking at my retirement, and I've realized that if I don't change how I handle things, I won't be able to take care of myself in 10 years. Because I don't ever want to be a burden to you later in life, I have to make some changes right now." Notice how that's framed. You aren't attacking them, you're protecting them from having to support a broke version of you 20 years down the line. You're framing your boundaries as an act of long-term love. The fourth shift is learning the language of boundaries. Most of us struggle to say no because we think it sounds cold or harsh. We need to learn how to say no with genuine love. Start practicing phrases like, "I'm just not in a position to help with that financially right now, but I am more than happy to help you brainstorm a plan to handle it," or "I've already reached my limit for gifts this year, so we'll have to find another way to make this work." By offering emotional support or help with problem solving instead of just handing over cash, you're still being a supportive family member without becoming a financial martyr. These micro-shifts are all about reclaiming your own agency. They're about moving from a reactive state, where you're constantly putting out everyone else's fires, to a proactive state, where you're finally tending to your own garden. It starts with just one no. It starts with one automated transfer. It starts with one honest, heartfelt conversation. Each of these small actions is a brick you're laying to rebuild the wall around your golden years. You aren't being cold, you're being a good steward of your life. You're making sure that the work of your entire lifetime isn't wasted, but is used to provide the peace and security you were always promised. To really see how these burdens play out in a real home, let's look at the story of Arthur and Sarah. They were a couple in their late 50s, living in a quiet, friendly suburb in Ontario. Arthur had spent 35 years working in logistics, and Sarah had been a dedicated, beloved teacher. They were what you'd call the ideal couple, the ones everyone in the family turned to. They had a modest but healthy retirement fund, a home that was almost paid off, and a clear plan to spend their winters somewhere warm. They were so close to the finish line they could taste it, but they were carrying an invisible burden that was slowly, piece by piece, dismantling their dream. The burden came in the form of their son, Mark, and Sarah's elderly mother, Evelyn. Mark was 32, a talented guy, but someone who just couldn't seem to hold down a job for more than a year. Every time he found himself between roles, Arthur and Sarah would step in and cover his rent. They didn't want him to have a gap on his credit report or lose his apartment. Meanwhile, Evelyn's health was starting to decline. Instead of looking into a care facility, Sarah insisted on being the primary caregiver. She was driving 2 hours every other day to clean her mother's house, manage her bills, and take her to every single doctor's appointment. For years, Arthur and Sarah told themselves they were just doing the right thing. They were being good parents and good children. But the cracks were starting to show. Arthur noticed their retirement account hadn't grown at all in 3 years. In fact, it was actually shrinking. Every emergency Mark had, a broken car, a security deposit, a vet bill, was an unplanned withdrawal from their own future. Sarah, on the other hand, was physically and emotionally frayed to the breaking point. Her blood pressure was climbing, and she was so exhausted from caring for her mother that she had zero energy left for Arthur or for herself. Their golden years were being spent in a state of constant, high-alert crisis management. The turning point came when Arthur had a minor health scare, a warning sign from his heart that he couldn't ignore. As he sat in that hospital bed, he realized with terrifying clarity that if he became truly ill, they had absolutely no safety net left. They had given it all away to Mark and Evelyn. He looked at Sarah, who was nodding off in the uncomfortable hospital chair from pure exhaustion, and he knew something had to change. They weren't helping their family anymore. They were just drowning right along with them. When Arthur was finally discharged, they sat down and had the big talk. It was incredibly painful. Mark was angry. He actually accused them of being selfish. Evelyn was confused and hurt when they suggested a part-time in-home nurse. But for the first time, Arthur and Sarah held their ground. They set a hard cap on Mark's support. They would pay for 3 more months of rent, and then he was truly on his own. They used a small portion of their savings to hire professional help for Evelyn, which freed Sarah from those grueling 4-hour round trips. The first few months were some of the hardest of their lives. The guilt was like a heavy, suffocating blanket they couldn't shake off. Sarah cried after almost every phone call with her mother. Arthur felt like a failure as a father when Mark had to take a job he hated just to pay his own bills. But then something amazing shifted. Mark actually kept that job. Because there was no bank of mum and dad to fall back on, he discovered a resilience he never knew he had. Sarah's health began to improve, her blood pressure stabilized, and she and Arthur started taking long walks together again, just like they used to. A year later, they were back on track. They weren't in that warm climate yet, but the golden years were no longer a mirage on the horizon. They were a reality again. The relief they felt wasn't just about the money, it was emotional. They had reclaimed their lives. Their story is a powerful reminder that you can love your family with all your heart and still prioritize your own survival. In fact, by prioritizing their own stability, they actually became better for their family. They were no longer resentment-filled martyrs. They were healthy, stable adults who could offer genuine love instead of just a checkbook and a tired, aching back. For many of us, these burdens aren't just practical or emotional. They are tied to our deepest spiritual beliefs. We want to be good people. Chang ta mon song mo kog doi fuk fu va il tuong. But sometimes we misunderstand what the scriptures are actually calling us to do. We confuse sacrifice with enabling, and we forget that we are called to be stewards, not just of our money, but of our very lives. Let's look at a verse that is often used to create a lot of guilt. 1 Timothy chapter 5, verse 8, which says, "Anyone who does not provide for their relatives, and especially for their own household, has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever." On the surface, that sounds like an absolute command to carry every single burden of every family member forever. But when we look closer at the context and the balance of Scripture, we see a different picture. Providing in the biblical sense is about ensuring basic needs and creating a foundation for life. It is not a command to subsidize the irresponsibility of able-bodied adults or to bankrupt your own future just to fund someone else's comfort. Contrast this with Proverbs chapter 13, verse 22, which tells us that a good person leaves an inheritance for their children's children. You cannot leave an inheritance, whether that is financial, emotional, or spiritual, if you have allowed your well to be sucked dry by every passing demand. To leave an inheritance, you must be a steward. Stewardship implies management, boundaries, and long-term thinking. It means saying no today so that there is actually something left for tomorrow. It means protecting the resources God has given you so they can be used for His glory over the long haul, not just for a temporary fix in a moment of family drama. And then there is the beautiful concept of the Sabbath. God didn't just suggest rest, He commanded it. He built it into the very fabric of how the world works. Why? Because He knows that humans are not meant to be perpetual machines of labor and caregiving. We are designed to find our ultimate rest in Him. When you refuse to take your golden years, when you refuse to allow yourself the season of rest you have worked so hard for, you are essentially saying that God's design for Sabbath doesn't apply to you. You are acting as if the world and your family will collapse if you stop carrying all that weight. That is a form of pride, not a form of service. Being a good steward of your golden years is a way of honoring the life God has given you. Think of your life as a vineyard that God has entrusted to you. Your job is to make it fruitful and healthy. If you allow the fences to break down and let every wild animal in to trample the vines, you haven't been a good or loving vineyard owner. You have been a negligent one. By setting boundaries, by protecting your health, and by securing your financial future, you are mending those fences. You are ensuring that your vineyard remains a place of peace and fruitfulness, not just for yourself, but for everyone who comes after you. Rest is a holy thing. Stewardship is a wise thing. When you look at your retirement through the lens of faith, you see that you have a deep responsibility to be well. You have a responsibility to be at peace. You are not honoring your parents by making yourself sick, caring for them beyond your own capacity. You are not loving your neighbor by letting your adult child drain your life savings. True biblical love is grounded in truth and wisdom. It is a love that seeks the long-term good of the other, even if that means making some very hard choices in the short term. Find peace in knowing that God wants you to have a golden season, a time of reflection, of worship, and of well-earned, beautiful rest. You have the power to make those micro shifts we talked about. You have the power to set the hard caps, to have those honest, brave conversations, and to start prioritizing your own oxygen mask. It will be uncomfortable at first. The guilt might scream at you. Your family might even push back. But on the other side of that discomfort is a freedom that is absolutely priceless. There is a version of you 10 years from now who is healthy, financially secure, and truly at peace. And that person is cheering you on today, thanking you for having the courage to set these boundaries now.